I wish Grandma didn't hate me anymore. That was my son's birthday wish. Standing in front of a 3-tier cake with 9 flickering candles. In the middle of the party. In front of 15 people. Family, friends, and neighbors all witnessed it. A 9-year-old kid had spoken out loud what I didn't dare say for 39 years of my life. At that moment, my mom completely lost control. She shot up, face red, and what she screamed next changed everything I'd ever believed about my family, about myself. Before I get into the details of this story, let me say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for taking the time to follow this story. Hello everyone, I'm Dominic. The story I'm telling today happened in mid-July last year, on my son Theo's 9th birthday. That morning, I woke up to the smell of melted butter from the kitchen filling the whole house. My wife, Celine, is a freelance baker. She'd been up since 4 a.m. finishing Theo's 3-tier racetrack birthday cake. When I walked into the kitchen, Theo was standing on a bit of a chair, eyes bright as he watched Mom put the final layer of frosting on a red fondant race car. Watching the two of them laugh together, I felt grateful for my little family, for the simple work at the auto shop I'd built up. Celine, with her hair in a messy bun, dusted with flour, and Theo, with eager eyes, counted each candle. Simple life, but full. But there was a nagging worry I didn't voice. I decided to invite my mom to the party, even though in 9 years she'd never remembered Theo's birthday. Not once. When Theo ran out to the yard, Celine put down her spatula and looked at me with that expression I knew too well. She took a deep breath and asked me, "Are you sure you want to invite her?" After my wife's question, I shrugged, trying to seem casual, and replied, "Mom's getting old. Maybe this year will be different." Right then, Theo ran back in, eyes sparkling, voice full of hope as he told me, "Dad, I have something special I want to give Grandma. I've been preparing all week. She's gonna love it this time. I know it." Celine and I looked at each other. She didn't say anything more, just turned back to the cake. But I saw her shoulders tense a bit, and her hands moved more slowly with the frosting. I asked myself what I was hoping for, but after everything, I pushed away all doubts and believed that family, no matter what problems they had, would always find a way to love each other. I thought that my whole life, and 45 minutes before the party started, that belief began to crack. That afternoon, I was fiddling with the outdoor speaker system when I saw my parents' Toyota parked in front of the house. 10 minutes passed, and nobody got out. I stepped onto the front porch, pretending to check the sprinkler system that had actually been broken since spring. The skill of pretending to be busy while eavesdropping, I'd learned at 12, when my parents fought in the kitchen about who forgot to pay the electric bill. My dad, Frank, stood by the car door, leaning down to talk to Mom through the cracked window. The smell of hot concrete hit my nose, cicadas buzzing like they were trying to drown out their voices, but I could still hear clearly. My mom, Vivian, sat inside, staring straight ahead. She sighed, then spoke in a tired voice. "I don't understand why I have to be here. How many years isn't enough, Frank?" Dad lowered his voice, that familiar "please don't cause trouble" tone, when he replied, "Dominic is our son, and Theo is our grandson. You promised." Last year's birthday flashed in my head like a broken movie playing on repeat. That day, Theo eagerly showed Grandma the drawing he'd made of her, that messy picture my son had spent a whole week finishing. My mom glanced at it and set it down like a pizza flyer. When Theo looked up and asked, "Do you like it?" my mom suddenly shot up, face red, hands gripping the chair. Dad had to pull her outside, mumbling explanations to everyone. She got a sudden headache, right? And I'm the Prince of England. Standing behind the cactus bush, I saw that look again, the look of someone swallowing something bitter. My mom was quiet for a long time, then her voice softened, almost a whisper to herself. "Every time I look into that boy's eyes, I see." She stopped mid-sentence. The neighbor's air conditioner suddenly shut off, and heavy silence crashed down. Dad immediately cut her off, his voice sharp as he warned, "You promised you wouldn't bring it up. Never again." Mom turned to look at Dad, her eyes red as she replied, "I'm not bringing it up, but don't make me pretend anymore. I'm tired, Frank, so tired." I stood there, still holding that damn hose, feeling like I just swallowed a chunk of ice. Pretend what? How many years was how many? What did she see in Theo's eyes? And why did I have the feeling that story involved me? My mom opened the car door after a few minutes of silence, quickly wiping the corner of her eye with the back of her hand. Then, in less than 2 seconds, she put on that social smile I'd seen my whole life. A smile that if you could package and sell, you'd make a fortune because it looked so real it was fake. I quickly turned away, twisting the hose like it was the most important job of my life. Part of me wanted to believe it was just old married couple stuff, like he forgot to buy milk or she watches TV too loud. But something was stuck in my chest, like when you swallow meat you didn't chew enough. Can't go up or down. I chose to push it away. That day was Theo's birthday. My son was waiting inside, eyes bright as stars, with the faith that this time, Grandma would be different. While waiting for the party to start at 2 p.m., waiting for Theo's friends to arrive, I sat in the kitchen watching my son play in the yard. Mom's words kept echoing in my head, and old memories suddenly flooded back like water bursting through a dam. When I was 12, my team made it to the school championship. I was the starting quarterback, and it was the most important game of my life, at least at the time. I asked Mom if she'd come watch, and she answered with the same look as if I'd asked if she wanted to get a root canal. I'm busy. Busy with what I didn't know. But the next week, Mom took the whole day off to take Paige shopping for a dress for a friend's birthday party. One dress. The whole day. But the most painful memory was my 16th birthday. I woke up, went downstairs to the kitchen, and there was nothing. No cake, no gifts, no wishes. Mom was making coffee, and Dad was reading the paper like any other typical day. I stood there for a while, then gently reminded her, Mom, it's my birthday today. My mom looked up, blinked a few seconds like she was loading data, then replied in a casual tone, Oh, your birthday? Let's do it another day. I'm busy. Another day never came. At 16, I learned that another day was how adults said never without having to say it straight. 2 years later, Paige's 16th birthday. Grand party at a restaurant on Scottsdale Road. 30 guests. A custom 3-tier cake from the most famous bakery in town. And my mom cried during her speech about my baby girl. I sat in the corner, clapping with everyone else, smiling on the outside but wondering inside what I'd done wrong. I tried. Good grades, straight A's. Did housework without being asked for. Didn't cause trouble, didn't talk back, didn't ask for things. I thought if I were more perfect, Mom would love me more. But no matter what I did, the way Mom looked at me was still like looking at something someone forgot at the house. Once I asked Dad, why does Mom love Paige more than me? My dad was quiet for a long time. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, looked away, and told me in a tired voice, Your mom loves you in her own way. Don't overthink it. His reassurance followed me for over 20 years. I learned to bury those questions deep, to keep living like everything was normal. Pretend it didn't hurt. Pretend I didn't see it. Pretend I didn't need to be loved. But then, looking at Theo through the window, watching my son eagerly holding that wooden box he'd made himself, believing this time Grandma would be different, I couldn't pretend anymore. Celine had been right when she warned me years ago. That cycle was repeating. And this time, the victim wasn't me, but my son. The party started at 2 p.m. My mom chose a seat under the patio, the farthest corner of the yard, with a whiskey, eyes checking her watch regularly like someone counting down every minute until she could leave. In my head, I thought, this is the last time. But maybe everything has to reach its breaking point, and that day was when everything exploded. Around 2:30, Theo ran over to Grandma, face beaming. My son stopped in front of her, took a deep breath like he was gathering courage, then spoke with a voice full of hope. Grandma, when I blow out my candles later, I have something surprising I want to tell you. Remember to listen. Okay. My mom didn't look up, eyes still glued to her phone screen when she replied to Theo in a flat tone. Aha. One word. Just aha like swatting away a buzzing fly. Theo stood there a few more seconds, waiting for something more. But my mom had already turned back to her phone, as if my son didn't exist. Theo's shoulders dropped, and my son shuffled away. I gripped the beer can in my hand until it dented. But the show wasn't over yet. About 5 minutes later, my sister Paige arrived with her 11-year-old twin daughters, Zoe and Mila, and my mom, who had just been sitting like a stone statue, suddenly looked like someone had plugged electricity into her. She shot up from her chair, face glowing, voice soaring as she called out, "My two princesses are here. Oh my God. It's been so long. I missed you girls so much." After that, she quickly hugged Zoe and Mila tight, kissed each of them on the cheek, stroked their hair, complimented how pretty and tall they were, and praised everything about them. The two nieces bragged about winning first place in a school dance competition, and my mom squealed as they just won Olympic medals. She pulled out her phone, made them stand next to her, took photo after photo, gushing nonstop. "You two look exactly like your mom when she was little, so beautiful. Oh my." Watching my mom's behavior, I turned to look for Theo. My son stood a few steps away, watching Grandma dote on his two cousins. That look, I knew it well, because I'd worn that look my whole childhood. The look of a kid standing outside a candy store window, watching other kids get to buy everything, while you get nothing. Then Theo timidly stepped forward, voice small like he was afraid of being rejected again. He said to my mom, "Grandma, can you take one picture with me?" Hearing Theo's request, my mom turned around. The smile on her face died as someone had just splashed water on it. She looked at Theo with an expression I can only describe as annoyed, then replied in an ice-cold voice, "Later. I'm busy taking photos with her granddaughters, but not 1 second for her grandson, at her grandson's own birthday party." Seeing my mom's actions and words, blood rushed to my face. I stepped forward, about to say something, maybe, "Mom, it's Theo's birthday today, or can you spare 1 minute? Or even, what the hell are you doing?" But Celine pulled my arm back. She leaned close to my ear, voice quiet but tense. Don't cause a scene in front of Theo. If you speak up now, he'll think he's the reason for the conflict." Hearing my wife's advice, I stopped, jaw clenched tight. Celine was right, always right, but being right didn't make me want to flip the table any less. A few seconds later, she pulled me into the kitchen, closed the door, and then turned to look at me with red eyes. Celine tried to control her voice when she said, "Do you see it now? She's doing it on purpose. Deliberately showing love to Zoe and Mila right in front of Theo to make our son see he's worthless in her eyes." Hearing my wife's words, I stood there, hand leaning on the kitchen counter, unable to say anything. Celine continued, her voice breaking, "And do you realize? She treated you the same way when you were little. You didn't want to see it." That was also the first time in my life that I didn't try to defend my mom. No, she's getting old. No, she has her own way of loving. No, maybe she didn't mean it. I started asking myself, is there something I don't know? Some reason that for 39 years no one told me? After leaving the kitchen, Celine and I returned to the backyard. Everyone had gathered around the main table. At that point, I just wanted to end the party quickly, push my mom out the gate, and close the door, maybe forever. Because to me, she'd never changed. Only we were foolish enough to wait for miracles from someone who didn't believe in miracles. The racetrack cake sat in the center of the table, 3 tiers, pure white frosting, yellow lane markers, and a red fondant race car parked on top, as if waiting for the starting signal. 9 blue candles flickering, the scent of vanilla and butter drifting through the air, smells that should have brought happiness, but for me then only made my stomach twist. Celine stood next to me, holding her phone to record video, her eyes still a bit red. She was trying. I was trying too. Both of us were playing happy parents while wanting to flip the table. My mom still sat in the far corner, that corner she'd chosen from the start of the party, like she was quarantining herself from the world. Her face was cold as stone, her eyes occasionally glancing toward Theo with something I didn't want to name. After the birthday song, I bent down, put my hand on Theo's shoulder, and said, "Close your eyes now, make a really special wish." After I said that, Theo closed his eyes. 15 people went silent, candles flickering. Somewhere, birds were singing, as if mocking the tension-filled atmosphere. Then Theo opened his eyes, but instead of blowing out the candles, my son looked straight at Grandma, and in that unmistakable voice of a child who didn't know that truth should sometimes stay silent, Theo said loudly, "I wish you didn't hate me anymore." I heard someone drop a glass. Maybe it was the neighbor lady. Perhaps it was my own soul leaving my body. But Theo wasn't done. My son kept talking, voice trembling but determined like he was reading a declaration he'd prepared for a long time. I know you don't like me. I see you hug Zoe and Mila, but never hug me. I see you take pictures with my cousins, but won't take any with me. The air felt like someone had sucked all the oxygen out. I looked at my mom. She shot up from her chair, her face turning from white to pink to red in real time. Theo swallowed and continued. Grandma, what did I do wrong? I tried so hard to be good. Tell me I'll fix it. Then the last sentence. Theo's voice breaking. I just want you to love me. I love you. I really do love you. 3 seconds of silence. Long as 3 centuries. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. Then my mom burst out laughing, the kind of laugh from someone who'd just been cornered and decided to stop running. She looked at Theo, then at me, voice trembling. Love me? You love me? What do you know about me to love? After my mom's cruel words, I stepped forward without waiting, standing in front of Theo. My voice shook from trying not to scream. Mom, stop it. My mom swatted my hand away like swatting a fly, eyes blazing as she yelled. Get out of the way, Dominic. I didn't back down. Blood rushed to my face, and I heard myself say, voice higher than intended, asking directly, Are you losing your mind? This is your grandson, a 9-year-old child. His birthday. What the hell are you doing? That was like someone pulling the pin on a grenade. My mom's face changed completely. She shook uncontrollably, 39 years of suppression bursting out, voice tearing through the afternoon air as she screamed. My grandson? My grandson? Then she laughed, a sound like crying twisted and warped, and continued, Don't make me claim that thing as my grandson. Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, my dad rushed over before she finished her sentence, trying to pull Mom away, his voice like a drowning man. Vivian, calm down. People are watching. But my mom had crossed that line people call calm. She pushed Dad away, lunged toward the cake table with red-rimmed eyes, and before anyone could understand what was happening, she grabbed the 3-tier cake, spun around, and threw it straight at Theo. That sound. I'll remember it until I die, the wet, heavy thud. The sound of cake hitting a 9-year-old child on his own birthday. Theo fell to the floor, frosting covering his face, his hair. The fondant race car flew off, shattered on the tile, rolling around like a cheap metaphor life likes to throw in people's faces. My son didn't cry. Theo's eyes were wide open behind the frosting layer, looking at Grandma with the eyes of a child who'd just learned his first lesson about betrayal, taught by his own family. My mom stood there, breathing hard, hands still covered in frosting. Then instead of snapping out of it, she kept screaming, voice hoarse like someone who'd held back too long and now had nothing left to lose. You're not my grandson. You'll never be my grandson. You have no right to call me Grandma. Around me, the world felt like someone had hit pause. I knelt and hugged Theo, cake frosting covering both father and son. My son started shaking. Then the crying broke out, choked, small and painful. I held him tight, hands stroking his hair, but my head was spinning like a weather vane in a storm. After everything that had happened, my dad stepped into the middle of the yard, his face gray as wet concrete. He looked at me with the eyes of someone who'd carried a secret too long, and finally had nowhere left to hide it. He opened his mouth, and what he said next tore apart everything I'd ever known about myself. In that horrifying moment, I looked around the yard. Guests were leaving hurriedly, some holding kids' hands, others grabbing bags, no one daring to look us in the eye. Mrs. Thompson, our neighbor of 20 years, stopped at the gate and said quietly, Dominic, if you need me to call the police, just signal. I nodded like a machine, not knowing whether to thank her or cry. Paige quickly led Zoe and Mila inside the house, muttering, You two go watch TV. The adults need to talk. The 2 little ones' eyes were wide, probably not understanding why the birthday party had suddenly turned into a horror movie. Celine also carried Theo inside, her arms holding our son tight, Theo's face still covered in frosting. Before stepping through the door, she stopped and turned to look at my mom, eyes cold as steel. No screaming, no yelling, just one short sentence. You wait right there. Then the door closed. Theo's crying echoed from inside, choked sobs, each sob like a knife cutting into my chest. When only family remained in the yard, My mom stood there, breathing hard, hair disheveled, looking like someone who just lost a battle she'd been fighting her whole life. My dad stood a few steps away from her, face ashen. I stood up, legs shaking slightly, looked straight at Mom, and asked, "What did you just say? Not your grandson? What does that mean?" My mom didn't answer, just laughed bitterly, the laugh of someone too tired to keep acting. I turned to Dad and asked, "Dad, what's going on?" My dad looked at Mom, then at me, then down at the ground. Tears started flowing down his wrinkled face. I'd never seen Dad cry, not once. He opened his mouth, voice trembling as he said, "Dominic, there's something I've hidden from you for a very long time. I don't know how to say this." Then my mom cut in, voice venomous. "Then say it. Tell him. I'm so tired. How many years, Frank? How many years have I had to look at that face every day?" Just then, the door opened. Paige stepped onto the patio, her face pale, her voice shaking as she asked our parents, "What's happening?" Nobody answered. My dad closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he started telling the story, each word falling heavy as stones. Before marrying my mom, Dad had a relationship with a woman named Rosalie. She worked at a bar on Van Buren Street, the kind of place married men would sneak off to. Rosalie wasn't respectable by my paternal family's standards. She was what people called a fallen woman, not decent. But Dad loved her, and Rosalie got pregnant. When Dad's family found out, they went crazy. My grandfather roared that he'd never let that kind of woman taint this bloodline. They forced Dad to cut off the relationship and marry Vivian, proper girl from a good family, clean. After telling the whole story, Dad stopped, voice choking as he said, "I was a coward, Dominic. I chose to listen to the family. I abandoned Rosalie when she was pregnant." Hearing Dad's words, Paige covered her mouth, eyes wide. I stood there like my feet were nailed to the ground. Rosalie gave birth to me alone. 3 months later, she died from postpartum complications. My aunt, Rosalie's sister, couldn't afford to raise me. She called, begging Dad to get me. Then Dad looked at me, tears streaming, and continued, "I brought you home, told everyone you were a distant relative's child we were helping raise. Vivian knew the truth from the beginning, but she agreed because she didn't want a scandal." After hearing Dad speak, my mom, no Vivian, burst out screaming. "Agreed? I was forced. You think I wanted to raise that woman's child? That dirty bloodline? I tried, Frank. I tried to see him as my son. But every time I looked into his eyes, all I saw was that filthy bloodline." Every piece fell into place in my head. Why did she never hug me? Why did she look at me with disgust? Why Paige was always the precious daughter while I was something she wanted to hide? I realized it wasn't that I wasn't good enough. In her eyes, I was tainted blood she couldn't accept. After all the truth was revealed, I looked at Vivian and asked directly, "So my whole life, you hated me because you thought I carried bad blood. And when you look at Theo, you see that bloodline in my son." Vivian laughed, a bitter laugh, and replied, "Finally, you get it. You're the child of that kind of woman, so your son is too. Blood never changes." Then Paige stepped forward, voice trembling as she asked Dad, So Dominic is my half-brother? And Mom hated him his whole life because of this?" Immediately, Vivian turned to Paige, eyes sharp, and said, "You don't understand, Paige. You don't know how I felt. Every day, looking at his face, every day being reminded of the betrayal. You don't understand." Then Dad stepped forward, trying to touch my shoulder, voice choking. "Rosalie wasn't a bad person, Dominic. She was just poor and had to do that work to survive. She loved you so much. She died holding you in her arms. I was a coward, I was wrong, I know." I stood there, everything I'd ever believed crumbling into pieces. But I didn't have time to hurt, because the door burst open again, and Celine stepped out. The wife I knew, gentle, patient, the one who always said calm down, honey, whenever I got angry, was gone. In her place was a woman I'd never met. Her eyes were cold as steel, her jaw clenched tight, her steps full of determination, and I knew the real storm was beginning. After the door opened, she walked straight to where Vivian stood, stopping exactly 1 step away. I saw Vivian step back half a step, maybe the first time in her life she'd backed down from anyone. Celine looked straight into her eyes, voice cold as ice. You just threw cake at my son. On my son's birthday. Vivian opened her mouth to respond. But my wife held up her hand, not to hit, but to command silence. Then my wife said to Vivian, I didn't give you permission to speak. Vivian went completely silent. I stood there, witnessing something I'd never seen in my entire life. Vivian is going quiet in front of another person. Then Celine pulled her phone from her pocket, screen still bright, and said to Vivian in a voice so calm it was terrifying. I've been recording video since the party started. By law, what you did is assault on a minor. Hearing my wife speak, Vivian's face changed from red to deathly pale. My wife lowered the phone, stepped another half step toward her, voice dropping but each word cutting like a knife. But I won't call the police. My son has suffered enough. I'll only say this once. If you come near Theo one more time, I'll do everything in my power to protect my child. Silence. The sound of the wind blowing through the yard was crystal clear. Then Celine turned to me. Her eyes softened. Her hand found mine, squeezed gently, and she said in a voice only we could hear, You don't owe her anything. You deserve to be free. My eyes stung with tears. My whole life, I'd waited for someone to say this to me. My entire life, I'd wondered what I'd done wrong. And standing in the wreckage of a birthday party, I finally understood that I'd never done anything wrong. I just loved the wrong people. After everything that had happened, I turned to Vivian, took a deep breath and said, Please leave my house. At that moment, Paige stepped forward, my sister's voice trembling as she called, Dominic. I looked at my sister, the person I'd been jealous of my whole life, the person I'd always wondered why she got love while I didn't. Then I said in a voice that wasn't angry, just tired, You grew up loved, so you didn't see it. Today you saw it, and you chose to stay silent. After that question, Paige opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. I said to Paige, I don't blame you, but I need time. Paige went completely silent and nodded after I spoke. A few minutes later, Vivian picked up her purse and walked toward the gate. Her back hunched over, steps heavy. She didn't look back. My dad stood for a second, turned to look at me with red-rimmed eyes, his voice choking as he said, I'm sorry. I didn't answer. After nearly 40 years, what did those 2 words mean? He turned away and followed her out the gate. The sound of the iron gate closing rang out sharply in the afternoon. I stood there, hands still gripping Celine's tightly, watching 2 shadows grow distant then disappear behind the cactus hedge. Nearly 40 years, ending on a July afternoon. But ending doesn't mean it's over. Sometimes the end is the beginning of something else. I squeezed Celine's hand once more, then we both turned and went into the house. We walked into the house. Zoe and Mila were huddled on the sofa, the 2 little ones' eyes wide as they looked at us like we were from another planet. Paige followed behind, my sister's face deathly pale. She went straight to her kids, voice trembling as she said, Let's go, girls, we're going home. Before leaving, Paige stopped and turned to look at me. Her eyes were red, and her lips were moving like she wanted to say something, but didn't know where to start. Finally, she only managed a short sentence. I'm sorry. I really didn't know. I looked at my sister, tiredly replied, I know, Paige, but now's not the time. She nodded, swallowed, then led Zoe and Mila to the door. Before getting in the car, she turned to look at me one last time, voice breaking. I'll call you. Please don't cut me off. I didn't answer. The door closed, the car started, and drove away. Finally, just the 3 of us were left. Celine sat holding Theo on the sofa, cleaning the frosting from his hair. My son wasn't crying anymore, but his eyes were swollen and puffy, and he kept shaking in waves. I sat down next to them, looking out the glass door. Outside, tables and chairs were still scattered, cake frosting still splattered on the tile floor, blue candles lying around under the trees. A birthday party turned into a battlefield. Theo sat quietly for a long time, then turned and asked me in a hoarse voice, Dad, why does she hate me like that? After that question, I looked at Celine. She nodded gently, and I told him, in the simplest language a 9-year-old could understand, about Grandma Rosalie he'd never known, about why Vivian wasn't really Dad's mom. about how Dad also grew up with the same questions. When I finished, Theo looked at me with eyes I'll never forget. Not pity, but empathy. The look of someone who understands that pain because they'd just gone through something similar. Then he reached out and hugged me. Voice small but steady. Dad, don't cry anymore. I'll be here with you. I didn't know I'd been crying. Celine hugged both of us, and we sat like that for a long time in the dark living room. Maybe at 9, these things were too early for Theo, but I didn't want him growing up with unanswered questions as I did. The next morning, when I went to clean up the yard, I found the wooden box Theo had made for Grandma. It was lying under a tree, kicked away by someone during the chaos. Picked it up, brushed off the dust, and opened it. Inside was a small letter, my son's messy handwriting. Dear Grandma, I love you. I hope one day you'll love me too. I stood in the middle of the yard, holding the box, and tears flowed again. That afternoon, we threw Theo another birthday party at Castle's End Coasters. Just the 3 of us, no guests, no 3-tier cake. Just roller coasters, chocolate ice cream, and my son's laughter ringing out for the first time in hours. 2 weeks later, my dad showed up at our door. I was about to close it, but he said urgently, I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. I'm here to apologize to Theo. Hearing him say that, I let him in, and I witnessed something I never thought I'd see in my life. Dad knelt in front of Theo, a nearly 70-year-old man kneeling before his 9-year-old grandson. Tears streaming down his face as he said, I'm sorry, son. I stayed silent too long. I let Grandma hurt you and your dad for so many years without stopping her. That's my fault. I'll spend the rest of my life making it right, if you'll give me the chance. Hearing my dad's words, Theo looked at me, as if asking, what should I do? I nodded lightly, signaling him. My son stepped forward, put his hand on his shoulder, voice clear. Don't cry anymore, Grandpa. I forgive you. A 9-year-old child forgives much more easily than we adults do. From then on, Dad visited Theo every week. He took him fishing at Tempe Lake, to baseball games, and most importantly, he told Theo about Rosalie. Stories I'd never heard in my whole life. Now my son heard straight from his lips. He was the one who caused the wound, so he had to be the one to heal it. A month later, Dad gave me an old wooden box with Rosalie's keepsakes. A few yellowed photos, a simple silver ring, and a letter. I opened the letter with trembling hands. My birth mother wrote, My son, if you ever read this letter, I want you to know that I love you. I loved you from the first moment I knew you existed. No matter what the world says about me, never think you don't deserve to be loved. Nearly 40 years, and this was the first time I heard my mom say she loved me. 6 months passed. Page called, voice choking. I don't want to lose you. I know I stayed silent too long, but please give me a chance. I wasn't completely ready, but I agreed to meet for coffee. Small steps. Aunt Margaret, my birth mother's sister, also contacted me through Dad. She sent me a photo of my birth mother holding me as a newborn, her face glowing. I met her at a cafe on Mill Avenue, the same street where Dad and my birth mother had met. We talked for 4 hours. She told me about Rosalie, about the woman who loved me until her last breath. Vivian didn't contact me. I didn't look for her either. Some wounds don't need stitching. Celine remained my rock. One night, she turned and said, You didn't choose the family you were born into, but you choose the family you build. As for Theo, he still jumps when someone speaks loudly, but he's recovering day by day. One evening, Theo asked me, Dad, Grandma doesn't love me, but you love me, right? I held him tight and whispered, I love you. Mom loves you. Grandpa loves you. And you'll never have to wish for that on your birthday again. If you're watching this story, I want to tell you a few things, lessons I want to share. First, no child is at fault for adult problems. If you're carrying pain from previous generations, you have the right to put it down. Second, protect your children first. Don't let them endure what you endured. Third, family is people who choose to love you, not people who carry the family name but only bring hurt. Before ending, what would you do in this situation? Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. My story ends here. If this story touched your emotions, please like and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for more compelling stories. Thank you for following this long story. "You're the most disrespectful granddaughter in this family." That's what my mom screamed in my daughter's face, right before her hand came down on Maisie's cheek and sent her stumbling backward on the staircase. I was born with legs that weren't normal. My whole life, Mom called me a burden, the family's shame, for something I never chose. I got used to it. I endured it. But the moment she crossed that line and laid a hand on Maisie, everything I'd been swallowing for over 3 decades couldn't stay down anymore. That's when I had to make the decision I'd been avoiding my whole life. And that decision exposed a secret my family had been hiding for nearly 20 years. Before I tell you what happened that day, thanks for choosing my story today. Hello everyone, I'm Warren, 38 years old now. But the story I'm about to tell happened 4 years ago, when I just turned 34. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, fixing electronics from home. Sounds simple, but really, I spend all day hunched over in this tiny living room, surrounded by piles of parts, soldering irons, and the smell of burnt plastic. People bring me everything from phones dropped in toilets to laptops with milk spilled on them by kids. It's not glamorous work, but it's enough to keep my daughter and me from worrying about rent each month. Maisie, my daughter, was 14 that year. Just the two of us in this little house ever since my wife Ellie died in a car accident. Maisie was only 1 year and 23 days old then. I remember that exact number because that day Ellie went out to buy a birthday cake for a coworker and never made it home. Oh, I haven't mentioned, I was born with clubfoot, had corrective surgery as a kid, but I still walk with a limp for life. Every step's a little tilted, a little off, enough to make people turn and stare on the street, and enough for my mom, Connie, to see me as the family stain for 34 years. My dad, Leonard, was different. He didn't hate me, but he never once opened his mouth to defend me either. He lived like a ghost in his own house, nodding along with everything Mom said. I gotten used to it, so used to it I thought I'd endure it forever, until that fateful Saturday afternoon. I was tightening the last screw on a customer's Nokia smartphone when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, heavy, not like how Maisie usually bounds down when she's hungry. When I looked up, she was standing there, face pale as a sheet, phone in her hand. Her eyes looked at me in a way that made my chest tighten. I knew something was really wrong. "Dad, I think you should read this." Maisie's voice shook as she spoke. Then she placed the phone on the table with the screen facing me. She had her curly brown hair pulled up in a high bun like always. But that day, a few strands had come loose and hung messily like she'd been pulling at her hair. Even though I could tell she was trying to stay calm, I saw her little fingers trembling slightly as she pushed the phone toward me. I set down the hot soldering iron and picked up the phone. The screen showed a screenshot. The sender was Kyle, 16, my sister, Shelby's son. Above the screenshot, he'd written with a bunch of rolling on the floor laughing emojis. "Yo, check out what Grandma said about your dad. Pathetic." I scrolled down to read the message my mom had sent in the family group chat, which obviously didn't include Maisie or me. Said, "I've put up with Warren for 34 years now. He was born a burden with that clubfoot, and my whole life I've had to explain him to people. Growing up, he was still a burden. Wife died young, left with a daughter with no future. I'm so tired of it all. From now on, I'm not inviting him to any family occasions, including my upcoming birthday. Consider this house not to have that son." Below that, Travis, my younger brother, responded, "Agreed. Clean house." Shelby dropped a heart emoji. And my dad? Leonard didn't respond at all. Silent. Like always. Nobody objected. Not one person. I finished reading and set the phone down on the table. My face didn't change expression. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd gotten used to this kind of pain a long time ago. This message was just the written version of what Mom had been saying to me my whole life. The only difference was that this time it was recorded in writing in black and white and was clear. I looked up at my daughter after a few seconds, trying to smile and reassure her. "I'm fine." The words I'd repeated my whole life every time I got hurt. But Maisie wasn't going to let me off that easily. For the first time, she exploded. Not yelling, not being disrespectful, but her voice shook, and her brown eyes, just like her mother's, turned red as she looked straight at me and said, "But I can't be fine, Dad. Grandma says you're a burden because of your foot. You didn't choose to be born that way. You raised me alone for 14 years. You stayed up all night when I had a fever in 3rd grade. You ate ramen for a whole week so I could have money for school supplies at the beginning of the year. And they call you a burden? My chest tightened looking at her. 14 years, and I'd never seen Maisie this angry. And what made my throat close up was that she wasn't angry with herself. She was angry with me. I pulled up a chair, sat down at her eye level, and gently explained. I endure it because I don't want you growing up with hatred. I don't want you to hate the family because of me. Maisie shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks, choking out. I don't hate anyone, Dad. I love you, and I don't understand why they treat you like this for something you couldn't choose. That night, I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the old air conditioner humming in the corner of the room. Mom's message didn't shock me, but the fact that Maisie had to read those words, that she had to know her grandmother saw her dad as something that needed to be cleaned out because of a disability I couldn't control, that pulled me back to the past. To the first time, I understood I was a problem in my family's eyes. I was 6 years old that year. My family lived in a 1-story house in suburban Tucson, the kind with a front yard full of cacti and a white wooden fence peeling from the desert sun. One fall afternoon, Mom was standing on the front porch talking to the neighbor lady. I was hiding behind the screen door, about to run out and show off a drawing I'd made at school. Mom's voice carried in crystal clear. I don't understand how I gave birth to something like him. Looking at him walk makes me want to die of shame. My whole life I have to live with having a clubfoot son. People look at me like I'm a criminal. The drawing fell from my hands. I stood there, 6 years old, understanding for the first time that I was something that made my mother ashamed. Congenital clubfoot. Nobody else in the family had it. Mom saw it as a personal humiliation, as I deliberately crawled out of her belly with these feet just to torture her. And from then on, I learned how to live in my own house. Every time I walked through the living room, Mom would sigh as if seeing me was torture. Walk faster. Looking at you makes my eyes hurt. When guests came over, she'd say with a voice full of self-pity, this one's been cursed since he was in the womb. But I'm the one who suffers most, having to raise him. 34 years. Not one hug. Never once did she say she loved me. Not one look of pride. And my dad? Sometimes when Mom went too far, he'd mumble come on and then go silent again. That was probably the highest limit of his courage. There's one moment I'll never forget. Mom was yelling at me in my room. You embarrass me in front of the whole family. I looked up and saw Dad standing in the doorway. His eyes looked in, something like pain, like guilt. Then he turned and walked away. Not one word. In that moment, I understood. Even Dad couldn't save me. Travis and Shelby learned from Mom how to treat their brother. They didn't hit me, didn't curse at me. They just looked right through me like I didn't exist. In every family photo, I was always standing on the edge. In every conversation, I was the silence nobody wanted to fill. And I grew up believing that. Believing I wasn't worthy. Believing these limping feet were a sin. Believing maybe I was born a mistake. Until I met Ellie. Ellie was the light that pulled me out of the darkness. But that light went out too soon. The weeks after the funeral, I don't remember how I lived. Who came to pay respects, who called to offer condolences, I don't know. I only remember one night, around 3 a.m., sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator, cold. The house we rented with money we saved from our jobs waiting tables and working in kitchens was small, with 2 cramped, dark bedrooms. On the table was a half-made bottle that had gone ice cold. My hands hung limp at my sides, my mind empty like a crushed soda someone had thrown away. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I understood why people choose to disappear. Not because they're weak, but because the pain was bigger than anything I thought I could bear. The only person who had ever seen me, loved me, and believed in me was gone, and I didn't know what reason I had left to wake up tomorrow. Then crying echoed from the next room, weak, but persistent. I sat there a few more seconds, my body heavy as lead. The crying started up again. I pressed my hands to the cold tile floor, forced myself up on my limping legs, and dragged each step to Maisie's room. My baby was lying in the crib, face flushed red, tears soaking both cheeks. I leaned down, picked her up, and pressed her to my chest. Maisie stopped crying, her brown eyes staring at me in the darkness. Ellie's eyes. My chest seized up. I whispered, my voice rough like I hadn't spoken in days. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I promise you. In that moment, I knew I didn't have the right to disappear. Not because I was strong, but because there was a tiny life that needed me to exist. A few days after the funeral, my mom showed up at the door. She walked in without being invited, looked around at the pile of diapers stacked in the corner, the sink full of bottles I hadn't gotten around to washing, then turned to me with her face scrunched up like she'd smelled something rotten. Let me raise the kid. A gimp like you doesn't know how to raise a child. I looked straight into her eyes. My whole life, I'd kept my head down, but this time I didn't. My voice was calm but firm. No, I'm raising Maisie myself. My mom laughed mockingly, shaking her head as she just heard a stupid joke. Fine, you'll regret it. Remember I told you so. She was wrong. I never regretted it for a single day. For the next 13 years, I was both father and mother. Days changing diapers, making bottles, taking her to school and getting her to sleep, and nights staying up late watching phone and laptop repair videos, learning every step until my eyes burned. Gradually, I got regular customers, a steady income, enough so we didn't have to worry about tomorrow's meal. But my family never left me alone. Mom would drop by to visit, which really meant looking around and criticizing. She'd stand in the middle of the living room with her arms crossed. The house is such a mess. How are you raising this kid? Travis came by once to borrow $300. Promised to pay it back at the end of the month. I waited 3 years, never saw a dime. Next time I saw him, he actually patted my shoulder and laughed. You're at home fixing broken phones. What do you need money for anyway? And Shelby would forget to send invitations to every nephew's birthday, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. 14 years. Not once. I silently endured it all. For Maisie, because I didn't want her growing up with a heart full of hatred. I thought if I didn't say anything, didn't react, she wouldn't have to bear the toxicity of these relationships. For 14 years, I thought silence was the shield protecting my daughter. I didn't know she'd been seeing everything, remembering everything. And that night, after reading the message, she did something I had no idea about, until the next morning. Around 6 a.m. on Sunday, I was sitting at my work desk, holding a small screwdriver, trying to remove the last screw on Mr. Martinez's Samsung Galaxy, the guy who owns the laundromat on the corner. The screen was cracked in the corner, but he said he still wanted to keep it because it had many photos of his late wife. Maisie was still asleep. Last night, she went up to her room early and said she was tired. I didn't ask more questions. Maybe that was my mistake. The sound of pounding on the door shattered the morning quiet. Not knocking, pounding. Boom, 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 like someone wanted to punch a hole through the door. I set down the screwdriver and stood up. Before I could get there, the door burst open. My mom stormed in, face red with rage, eyes bulging like she'd lost her mind. Her hair wasn't even brushed, her jacket buttoned wrong, as she just jumped out of bed and driven straight here. My dad shuffled in behind her, face pale as a sheet, mouth moving like he wanted to say something but didn't dare. The moment she stepped over the threshold, my mom pointed her finger at my face and screamed, "Your daughter! That kid dared to call me at 2 a.m. asking why I hate you? What kind of way are you raising her?" I stood frozen. Did Maisie call her? At 2 a.m.? Asking why she hated me? I had no idea about any of this. Instinct made me turn to look up the stairs. Maisie was standing there, hand gripping the wooden banister tight. She was still wearing her blue pajamas with the little cats on them, her hair messy from sleep. Her face was pale, but her eyes looked straight at me, not avoiding. My mom kept screaming, spit flying everywhere. "Ever since I gave birth to you, I've put up with you. My whole life. People ask me, why does your son walk like that? You know how humiliated I am? Now your kid dares to call me in the middle of the night, asking why I hate you? What the hell gives her the right to ask me that?" Light footsteps on the stairs. Maisie walked down each step, slowly, back straight. When she stopped at the bottom step, Maisie looked straight at her grandmother and said, her voice strangely calm, "Grandma, I called you. Dad doesn't know anything about it. I decided to call myself." Hearing that, my mom whipped around to face her granddaughter. Eyes narrowed with menace, voice hissing, You dared to call me in the middle of the night to question your grandmother?" Maisie didn't back down one step, still keeping her voice respectful as she answered, I wasn't questioning you. I just wanted to understand. Why do you hate Dad because of his foot? He never got to choose to be born that way. In that moment, I saw my mom's face twist with rage. She rushed toward the stairs, mouth screaming at her granddaughter. You're the most disrespectful kid in this house. I'll teach you how to talk to adults. Her hand swung up and came down on my daughter's cheek. Just like that, before I could even realize she'd crossed the line. A sharp smack echoed through the small room. Maisie stumbled. Her foot slipped on the stair step, and she fell backward, her shoulder hitting the wooden railing. Time seemed to freeze. I went numb. I rushed to my daughter on legs that felt anything but typical. Her left cheek was bright red, clearly showing the imprint of 5 fingers. Her eyes were wide with shock, but she didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat there, looking at me. Then something I never thought would happen happened. My dad stepped forward, his wrinkled hand grabbing my mom's wrist, pulling her away. His voice was shaky but firm as he said to his wife, Connie, stop. That's our granddaughter. My mom turned to her husband, eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, her voice shrill. You dare oppose me? My dad didn't let go, his old eyes welling with tears as he answered her. You just hit our granddaughter, a 14-year-old child, for asking a question. He swallowed, his voice choking as he continued. I've been silent for 34 years, watching you treat Warren this way. I'm a coward, I know, but I can't stay silent anymore. I looked at Dad. For the first time in my life, I saw him stand up straight in front of Mom. And for the first time in my life, I stood up straight too. I walked over on my limping legs, stood between Mom and my daughter. My chest was pounding, but my voice was strangely calm as I looked straight into her eyes and said, For 34 years, you've hated me because of this foot. 34 years you've called me a burden for something I couldn't choose. I took a deep breath, then asked her straight to her face. So let me ask you one question. Did I ask T.O. be born? My mom stood speechless. I continued, each word clear. I didn't choose these feet. I didn't choose to be your son. That was your decision when you gave birth to me. I don't owe you anything. I paused, letting each word sink into the air, then said, If you hate the child you gave birth to just because they're not perfect according to your standards, then the problem is with you. Not with me. Never with me. My mom's face went white as a sheet. In 34 years, she'd never heard me talk to her like that. Finally, I pointed toward the door and said firmly, Now, get out of my house. Silence for a few seconds. Then my mom burst out laughing mockingly, trying to regain her familiar air of superiority as she answered me. What are you going to do to me? Call the cops on your own mother for a slap? You'll be a laughingstock to everyone. I didn't answer. My hand pulled my phone out of my pants pocket, dialed the number, brought it to my ear. Her eyes blinked rapidly. For the first time, I saw panic in that gaze. When the operator answered, I spoke into the phone, my voice steady. Hello, I need to report an assault. A woman just hurt my 14-year-old daughter in my home. The person is my birth mother. Name's Connie. Address is 2847 West Oak Street. Hearing that, my mom screamed, her voice cracking. You've lost your mind. I'm your mother. You're calling the cops on your own mother? I hung up after confirming the information, looked straight into her eyes, and said, This isn't about one slap. This is the last time you lay a hand on my daughter. My dad stood beside us, tears silently streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. He didn't defend his wife, didn't say anything more, but he didn't leave either. Maisie still sat on the stairstep, looking at her grandparents and me, tears streaming down her face, but her lips curved up slightly. My mom looked around the small living room, as if she were looking for someone to take her side. There was no one. The police arrived faster than I expected. My mom was taken away when she refused to leave the house voluntarily. She screamed in their faces that this was family business, that I had betrayed her, that the whole world had gone crazy. My dad stood on the front porch, watching the police car. Then he turned to Maisie and me, his eyes red-rimmed, voice shaking as he said to us, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to both of you. Then he turned around, hurried toward his old car parked by the street, started the engine, and drove off in the direction the police car had gone. But what the police found in the system about my mom after that, that's what left all of us speechless. I stood there watching until Dad's car disappeared completely, too. I don't remember what I was thinking as I watched him go. Maybe it was relief that he finally spoke up. Perhaps it was bitterness that he only spoke up when his granddaughter got hurt, not when his son was mistreated for 34 years. But maybe it was just emptiness, because I didn't know how I was supposed to feel anymore. Then I turned back into the house. Maisie was still sitting on the stair step, arms wrapped around her knees, curled up small like she wanted to shrink into nothing. Her cheek still had the red mark, but what made my chest ache was her eyes. No longer the calm she'd shown when facing her grandmother, just the confusion of a child who'd witnessed too much in one morning. I sat down next to her, didn't say anything, just pulled Maisie into my arms. She trembled, then broke down crying. Not loud sobbing, but that choked kind of crying, like she'd been holding it in this whole time. I held my daughter tight, whispering over and over in her ear, "I'm sorry. It's my fault. Because of me. You had to go through." Maisie shook her head in my arms, choking out, "No, it's her fault. Not yours. Not yours." We sat like that for a long time, on those old stair steps, until the crying quieted and the midday sun started streaming through the window. 2 days later, the police officer handling the case called me. His voice hesitated like he didn't know how to say it. In the system, my mom had a record, and the secret she'd hidden for 15 years was finally exposed. 15 years ago, my mom was forced to quit her job at a childcare center in Scottsdale. Reason: multiple reports of excessive disciplinary behavior with children. 3 families had filed complaints. The center handled it by firing her and compensating the families to avoid public litigation. The families took the money and signed non-disclosure agreements. My mom wasn't prosecuted that time, but the record stayed in the system. I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear, my other hand shaking so much I had to put it down on the table. Memories I tried to bury for years came flooding back. The painful punishments when I was little. Mom's shrill voice, "I do this because I care about you." The night I was locked in the dark storage room because the way you walk embarrasses me in front of guests. I sat in that cramped darkness, 8 years old, crying silently because I was scared of more punishment. My whole life, I thought something was wrong with me that made Mom treat me that way. I thought it was because of this foot, because I wasn't good enough, because I really was a burden. Turns out, the problem was never me, never the foot. The problem was Mom. That night, Maisie knocked on my bedroom door. She stood in the doorway, eyes red, fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. She looked down at the floor, voice choking. "Dad, I'm sorry. Because I called her, she came over. Because of me, you had to." I stood up, walked to my daughter, sat down at her eye level, and took Maisie's hands. "Maisie, look at me." She looked up, tears rolling down her cheeks. I squeezed her hand gently and said, "You called because you love me. You asked the right question, didn't you? That's a question I should have asked 34 years ago." I paused, took a breath, and continued. "She didn't do that to you because you called. She did that because that's how she's handled everything all along. She did that to me. She did that to other children. That's her problem, not yours." Then I reached up to wipe the tears from her cheek, whispering, "Never apologize for loving someone. Understand?" Maisie nodded, then hugged me tight. The days after that, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Travis called first, voice full of rage. "Are you insane? Calling the cops over something so small? You know how humiliated Mom is?" I answered back, voice calm. "That's your niece, 14 years old. You think that's normal?" Silence. I hung up. Shelby texted, "Warren, Mom's old, just a little hot-tempered. Don't make a big deal out of this. The whole family's watching." I typed back, "If someone did that to Kyle, would you call it just a little hot-tempered?" No more replies. I turned off my phone. A week later, Dad came alone again. He stood in front of the house, shoulders sagging like he was carrying a boulder on his back. This time, he didn't apologize. He just stood there, voice quiet as he asked me, "Can I see Maisie?" I turned inside, asked my daughter, "Maisie, Grandpa wants to see you. Do you want to come out?" Maisie walked out of the living room and looked at Grandpa standing outside the door. She was quiet for a few seconds, then turned to me, voice calm but firm. I'm not ready, Dad. He was silent for so long, watching Grandma treat you that way. I need time, maybe someday, but not now. I nodded, respecting my daughter's decision, then turned to Dad. You heard her. Maisie needs time. I need time too. I paused, then added, but you stood up that day. That matters. Dad nodded, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks, whispering, I understand. I'll wait, however long it takes. 2 months later, the court handed down its verdict. With the prior record plus the incident with Maisie, my mom was sentenced to 2 years probation, a permanent restraining order for Maisie, and a mandatory anger management program with regular psychological evaluations. I cut off contact with the people I needed to. No drama, no long declarations. Just stopped responding. One evening, Maisie sat next to me on the couch and suddenly asked, Are you sad, Dad, about losing your family? I looked at my daughter, smiled, and answered, I'm sad the family wasn't what I hoped it would be, but I didn't lose my family, Maisie. I have you, and I have your mom in everything I remember about her. And that's the promise I kept to myself every year after. When Maisie turned 15, Dad started showing up outside our house every week and not coming in. Not knocking, just leaving a bag of food on the front steps. Sometimes sandwiches from the bakery she liked as a kid. Sometimes a pepperoni pizza box, with a bit of note. I miss you and Maisie. Every week, rain or shine. He'd drive over an hour from his house to here, leave the bag, then drive back. Maisie would look through the window, wouldn't come out, but didn't tell me to make him go away either. When she turned 16, Grandpa started sending handwritten letters. Not simple birthday cards, but long letters, telling about the years he stayed silent, about the regret that ate at him every night, about the times he wanted to speak up and defend me but swallowed the words instead. He wrote to both Maisie and me, 1 letter a week. His handwriting was shaky, and some parts were smudged. Maisie read them all. She didn't write back, but started keeping the letters in a small box under her bed. That same year, I heard that Travis had gotten divorced. Shelby was in litigation with neighbors over a land dispute. They had their own problems but never once considered reconciling with me. I wasn't waiting for that anymore either. One afternoon, when she turned 17, Maisie stepped outside to see Grandpa putting the food bag by the door. I stood behind the screen door, watching my daughter walk over to him. The two of them stood facing each other for a long time, neither saying anything. Then Maisie spoke first, her voice soft but clear. Come inside, Grandpa. We just made spaghetti. Dad stood speechless, eyes red-rimmed. From then on, he came to dinner with us every week. He learned how to talk to his granddaughter, learned how to ask about me without avoiding eye contact, learned how to be a grandfather after 17 years of absence, not rushing and not demanding immediate forgiveness, just small steps, patient, the way he should have done all along. And my mom? She completed her probation program, but never once made contact. I didn't look for her either. Some wounds need time to heal, and some scars don't need to heal. For years after that fateful day, my daughter had shown me I was right to choose to stay. Maisie stood on the stage at North Phoenix Prep's graduation ceremony, valedictorian, accepted to Harvard with a complete financial aid package, social work major. I sat in the 3rd row, my limping legs crossed like always. On my chest, I wore a small white chrysanthemum, Ellie's favorite flower. Next to me, Dad sat quietly, his back a little more hunched than 4 years ago, but his eyes bright as he looked up at the stage. Maisie held the microphone, looked down at the auditorium, took a deep breath, and spoke. I was asked to talk about success, about the future. But today I want to talk about the man sitting in the 3rd row. She paused, her eyes finding where I sat, then continued. My dad isn't perfect. He doesn't have a college degree, doesn't have a glamorous job. He's just a phone repair guy, sitting in a small house in Phoenix with screwdrivers and soldering irons. Her voice shook slightly as she continued. Dad was born with feet that are different from other people's. Some people hated him for that, but he still chose me. When Mom died, Dad was 21, alone with a child not even 2 years old. He could have given up, but he didn't. Maisie smiled, tears sparkling in her brown eyes just like her mother's. her voice warm as she talked about me. Dad taught me that love doesn't need to be perfect. Love needs to be real. He loved me with everything he had, even though he didn't have much. She turned to look straight into my eyes, her voice clear and confident. I'm proud of my dad. Not because he's rich or successful in the way people usually think, but because he overcame every obstacle, every prejudice, every judgment to love me. And that's the most precious thing I've ever received. I didn't hide my tears, wasn't ashamed, didn't need to hide them. Next to me, Dad also quietly raised his hand to wipe his eyes. She paused for a beat, then said, voice choking, "Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mom in heaven. I love you both." Applause rang out through the auditorium, and I was prouder than I'd ever been. After the ceremony, Dad and I stood next to Maisie for photos. 3 generations, 2 men with their own scars, and a young woman who'd taught both of them how to open their hearts. While the photographer was adjusting his camera angle, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure in the distance. My mom stood on the other side of the parking lot, not coming close, just standing there watching. Her hand gripped her purse tight, her eyes red-rimmed. I didn't go to her. She didn't come over either. Some distances don't need to be filled. If you're listening to the story, I want you to remember one thing. You didn't choose to be born, didn't choose your family, didn't choose your body. If someone hates you for something you couldn't choose, that's their problem, not yours. If I had 3 pieces of advice for all of us after this story, they'd be, first, never believe anyone who says you're a burden just because of something you can't control. Second, asking the right questions is never disrespectful. Don't be afraid to question unfair treatment. Third, real family is the people who choose to love you for who you are, not people who happen to share your blood. That's where my story ends. Before I finish, I want to ask you something. If you were me, would you forgive my mom? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If the story touched you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to show your support. Every interaction helps my story reach more people. Thanks for listening to my story. See you in the next ones.